I showed you how to use the help system to find out more information about the commandlets that exist and to see examples of them. Now let's make a comment. A comment we might make about these commandlets that we're using is, man, they sure have crummy names. I mean, dir for directory just sounds a lot more intuitive than something like get child item. So you might miss the old ways of referencing things, and as I've shown you previously, you can type in some of those old ways of typing them, dir or ls. And technically, under the covers, these things are just aliases to the commandlet that you have seen previously. And I can prove that by typing get-alias and then naming something. So let's reference dir. And what it's showing me here that dir, when I use it, is really just pointing to get child item. And similarly, get alias ls. And if you wanted to, you could create your own aliases. How would you, following the PowerShell paradigm, set an alias? Well, if you're familiar with that verb-noun pattern that they use, and you'd probably be correct if you guessed that the way to set an alias is set-alias. And I'm going to say that, let's see, get crazy points to get child item. And so even though that didn't exist before, now I can type in get crazy, and it works exactly like get child item does. Okay, one last thing related to aliases that I can do is I can show what all of the aliases are on my system. So I can just type in get alias without any arguments following it, and I hit return. And for the most part, what we're going to find is that the aliases are just three-letter summaries or abbreviations of the full commandlet, but sometimes it's something different. So for example, RV is remove variable, etc. If I go up here into the list, let's see if I can find my get crazy alias, and there it is. Get crazy points to get child item. And so does GCI, and so does dir, etc. All right, so now you know how the alias system works. You can create your own aliases or see which ones are already there. All right, so having talked about aliases, let's move on and talk about strings along with numbers. That tends to be a very important thing when working with computers. So I'll set another variable, $name, and I'll set it equal to my name, which is Dagan, which is an abbreviation of an Indian name, Daganawida, by the way. Okay, and if I wanted to print that back out to the screen, I could just say $name, and it invokes the equivalent of a commandlet write host on that variable. So it's kind of like the print command. So the print command is kind of assumed, I suppose, when you just type in a variable name at the line. But let's use the official way of doing print to the screen, which is write host, and you can put things in parentheses or in single double quotes. My name is, and put name in there, and hit return. Another thing you could try is turn those into single quotes, and the editor suggests exactly what's going to happen, which is it's not going to be interpreted or expanded, or however you want to say it in your favorite programming language. And so you just get back the literal of what was contained in the single quotes. Because strings are objects, you could learn more about them and do things like pull out the substring method from it. So let's do name and pipe that to get member, if you remember that command. And we're going to learn about the attributes associated with this object. There we go. And so one of the things that's available with this particular type of object is I can do a dot and then substring method on it and just give it a starting index. So I could do then name dot substring and just say, like, let's start from character 2, and there you get just a part of my name rather than the entire name. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about strings for the moment. Now let's talk about comparison operators. So if you're familiar with programming languages, oftentimes you do like a double equal or a not equal or something like that. But oftentimes in scripting languages, they do something a little different, and they express things as dollar sign like e or hyphen eq, hyphen nq, ne for not equals, hyphen less than or greater than. So that's how it's written. So if I do like 2 is equal to 2, it returns back true. If I say 2 is equal to 3, it returns back false. So you could do the same kind of things with equal to, not equal to, less than, greater than, etc. And if you want, just go ahead and pause the video and play with that for just a moment. And if you choose not to pause, then let us proceed on to the next topic, which is working a little bit more with numbers. So I can create a range or generate a range of numbers by doing 1.10. And if I do that, it creates for me 10 objects and prints them out one at a time. And I could be a little bit more aggressive with that and do 10.99, and it's going to print out a whole bunch of numbers. And so now that you know how that works, let me show you another interesting feature of PowerShell that relates to working with an array of items. So if you recall, everything that is pushed to the screen is an object. So every single one of these numbers is an object, and there are some ways that I can take advantage of that fact. And let me show you that. So if I go 1.10, and I'm going to pipe this to something special which iterates through each of the objects that's been that is contained in whatever precedes the pipe. So if I type the word for each, and then I do this curly brace $_ what this does is it gives me a way to iterate through each thing in the collection that was passed to it and reference it as $_, kind of like a generic name for a variable. So if I type that, it's like, well, that's the same thing as 1.10, which in and of itself is not terribly interesting, but I can start to work with these objects in different ways now if I understand that. So one thing I can do is I can say, take that, and I can say times 2. So this is going to be the equivalent of a print statement here. So print out whatever the equivalent is of multiplying the current object times 2, and then just do that every single time. And so I get double the number there. Other ways of working with this type of idea here, tricky ways of printing things out to the screen, I could do like this asterisk, or I'll call it a snowball, and multiply it by 5, and it prints it 5 times. Or here's another fun little string trick, ho, multiply that by 3, and we go ho ho ho. So we're starting to feel very festive. All right, let's get even more festive and create half of a Christmas tree. 1.10, and then I'm going to say pipe that to for each, and then I'm going to do a little snowball thing here and multiply that by the number that's being passed in. There we go. Half of a Christmas tree. So I hope you enjoyed your brief holiday references. We're going to go on to something else now. So building on this idea here that we can iterate through a list of objects that were passed into it, think about instead files that are being passed in as an array or processes. What we could do is iterate over every single one and do something like count the number of files that are contained in a directory, or count the size of the folders, or sorry, the size of the files in a directory, and sum them all up by iterating over them. So let me show you an example of how we might get the size of all the files in a particular directory. So I'm going to start off with get child item, and then I'm going to pass that to for each, and then I'm going to create a variable called size and say size is equal to, right now it's empty, size plus, and then I'm going to say $_, so each item that is being returned from child item, so one at a time. I'm going to take each of those and grab their length property. So here's the magic of objects, is I can grab its length property and then add it to some variable. All right, so if I do that and hit return, nothing too exciting yet, but I can do then $size, and there we go. All right, so is this perfect? Like, well, this isn't the ideal way to run it, because if I do it a couple times, the number keeps getting bigger and bigger. So let me show you another technique for setting variables and doing multiple things on a single line. So what I could do is I could do size equals 0 and then a semicolon. So the semicolon in essence creates a brand new line, and then I'm just going to copy and paste what I had there before, because any good programmer is lazy. And so I copy that out, and then I do another semicolon, and then typing that right there is the equivalent of it being on another line, and it's just going to print that value out to the screen. So now if I run that and do it over and over again, I keep getting the same answer each time, which is perfect. Okay, I'd like you to take a second and do another challenge for yourself, and the challenge would be to pick another directory other than just the default directory that I'm in, and print out the sum total of the files that are in that directory. So go ahead and pause the video and give that a try, and come back when you're done. Okay, assuming that you did that, there's actually a couple different ways. Earlier I showed you can do like -path, and you can do C drive and then pick some particular directory. Another thing you could do is kind of the default thing that it expects is just a path argument, so that would give you the same result as well. Okay, so one of the things that happens when we call commandlets like this and get back a whole ton of objects is that, well, we get too much information, and sometimes we'd probably want to filter that information. This one isn't too long, but in other cases a commandlet might return thousands of items. So how can we get just the thing that we want? Well, let's talk about that. One way we can do that, for example, we could pull off the first item that's returned from the list and nothing else, is by, well, let me just type what I had before, and then I'm going to wrap it with some parentheses. And this is sort of like saying, give me the variable back that's returned from that command. And then I'm going to treat it as an array, which it is, and say, give me the first item. So give me the first item off of that array that gets returned. And with that, I get just the first item. So that's awesome. All right, let's look at some other examples and change context now. So previously, I've been showing you the getChildItem a lot. Let's look at getProcess. Because in the production world, you're probably concerned about, are there processes that are using up a lot of CPU that might take down my computer, or that I'm making it work too hard or too slow? So let's learn a little bit more about that. So I say get process, and it's showing lots and lots of things. And because my computer is a little bit slow as it runs in a VM on my Mac right now, I'm going to scroll back up to the top, and here are some of the properties associated with each process, or each of these rows is an object, and here are the properties associated with each object. There's a name of the object, and then there's a property called SI, ID, CPU, WS, PM, NPM, and handles. Okay, another thing I can see is CPU usage. So higher means that it's consuming more CPU usage. All right, so let's scroll down a little bit and maybe look at what we did before. Imagine we want to pull off just one item. Well, we could do that and get the first item in the list. And we'll do a 0. All right, application frame host is the first item there, and we can see it's using a little bit of CPU, which reminds me, maybe I want to know which process is using the most CPU on my system. Well, for that, we're going to have to introduce a new command, which is sort. So I'm going to do get process, and then from that array of items that's returned, I'm going to say sort the data and do it by a property, and that property is going to be CPU. And I'm going to say that, well, I'll just do it like that first. And it does it in ascending order, so there's an empty column here initially, and then eventually we get the things that are using the most amount of processing power. All right, and I'm just going to change gears here midstream, and I'm going to stop using this window, and I'm going to instead go over to this PowerShell ISE window. That'll allow my commands to stay on screen a little bit longer, so I'll minimize the other thing, and let's start typing in here. All right, so we did get process sort hyphen. Now the reason why I'm jumping over to here is because I want to show you that when you're using this interface, that it suggests the properties or the switches that are associated with each of the commands that you're using. And that's a good thing so that you don't make mistakes. Another thing that's available with sort is I can have a switch, kind of like an on-off true-false option. And one of them that was listed in that list is called descending, so that when I run that again, and I'm going to do this option right here, which is F8, and now, if I scroll back up to the top of my list, I see at the top of the list the thing that's using the most amount of CPU power. Okay, and then if I want to modify that a little bit, let me copy and paste that. What if I want to know just the first item? So I'm going to wrap that up with the parentheses so that I can treat it like a list, an array list. And then I want to get just the first item that's returned from this sorted list. And then once again, I'm going to click Run Selection. And I get the first thing, which is what I saw before. Fantastic. Okay, so that works fine. Actually, let me just change my options here. I want to increase my font size a little bit. So in my scripting pane, in the foreground, let's make my text a tiny bit bigger. All right. Hopefully that's helpful to you as you watch. Okay. So running it this way is fine, but what if instead of wanting a particular item, what if I wanted a range of items? Well, here's another option. Let me copy this first row right here, because I'm going to reuse that, and I'm going to pipe this to another object, which is called select. So I'm going to say select, and then hyphen first, and then the following first, you're supposed to put a number. So I'm going to say 5. What this is telling the PowerShell to do is take from the list of objects the first 5 things that are given to it. So if I run this now with F8, now I see it shows you down here the command that was run, and then it shows me just the 5 top items that are using CPU. So awesome sauce. All right. Now, I feel like this video is getting a little long, so I'll pick up from here in just a minute and stop this video.